Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for your shared commitment to one of the cornerstones of democracy, local journalism. I'm Catherine Badalamente, President and CEO of Graham Media Group. You may know us as WDIV Local 4 here in Detroit. And it's my honor to welcome you to the Crisis in Local News Summit. This summit wouldn't have been possible without the collaboration of our valued partners. You'll see the full list on the screen and behind me. We're deeply grateful for their support and commitment to strengthening local news. Special thanks to Detroit PBS, with support from the Knight Foundation, for filming today's session, and to Graham Media Group, my team, for producing the video you're about to see. But to start us off, it's my privilege to hear and to introduce from Sandy K. Baruah. Sandy Baruah is President and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, representing 54 million residents and 11 Fortune 500 companies. He previously led the U.S. Small Business Administration under President George W. Bush during the 2008 financial crisis. Baruah champions local journalism, partnering with media to inform the public on business, policy, and economic issues. Welcome, Sandy.
Just like Mom wrote it, Catherine, thank you so much. And I want to welcome all of you, especially our out-of-town guests, to the great state of Michigan and the great city of Detroit. We're delighted to have all of you here today to discuss this critical element of American democracy. While we have many folks from out of town, and I'm delighted, so where's my friend Chuck Todd? There he is. Chuck, welcome back to Michigan. Chuck was our guest at the Mackinac Policy Conference, I think in 2024, and had a fabulous dinner. And we're just so delighted to have one of America's premier journalists here with us today. You know, I'm personally bummed that, Chuck gave up his historic seat as the MPT anchor. And when Chuck was holding court, we knew that the information coming from Chuck and his show was something we call journalism. Now, many of us get our news today from what are not news sources. I'm the first one to say I love The Daily Show. I love getting entertainment from all the social media platforms. But that is not news. It's not news at a national level, and it's certainly not news at the local level. Now, perhaps it's odd that they asked a washed-out Republican staffer, an old-fashioned John McCain, Bob Packwood Republican, to kick off today's events, but perhaps not. A friend of many of us in this room, Devin Scillian, formerly of NBC Detroit, WDIV, reminded all of us frequently that the Fourth Estate is the only business enumerated in the Constitution. My first boss and my mentor to this day, a U.S. Senator back in the day, was often fond of saying, "I'm not often misquoted by the press, but I am often quoted accurately of things I wish I hadn't said." It is that kind of experience from those who are considered adversaries to the free press become the most ardent champions of the free press. What's happening in City Hall, the county courts, the state capitol, and of course in Washington must be reported on, not opinionated on. There's certainly room for opinion. And there's plenty room for opinion in our social media feeds, but what is at risk is real news held to real journalistic standards. That was the beauty of the day when I was growing up, of people like John Chancellor, and the beauty of my older days of people like Devin Skillion and so many of you in this room. So my thanks to my local media friends and champions and occasional adversaries, the Hiram Jacksons of the world, the Rich Homburgs, the Bob Ellises, the Gary Miles, the Casey Cranes. So welcome all to Michigan, to Detroit, and welcome to this incredibly important event. I appreciate your commitment to this commitment to democracy. Be well.
Thanks again, Sandy. Now let's talk about why we're all here. We are facing a crisis, one that doesn't always make headlines, but affects every one of us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tanisha Leonard, president of Pitch Black, headquartered here in Detroit, and chair of the Local Media Foundation Board. I'm standing before you to welcome you all and say that I'm so proud to stand with you who believe that everyone deserves access to trusted local news. We're losing newsrooms at an alarming rate, and with them, the informed engagement that powers our democracy.
So to help bring that reality home, we'd like to share a short video that was created by Graham Media Group. It shows just how deeply this crisis affects Michigan, residents, and the communities that we serve.
In Detroit and beyond, newsrooms like Outlier Media and Crane's Forum are uncovering the erosion of local news and offering real solutions. The Detroit Free Press gave voice to 100 Michiganders. Crane's Detroit Business explored how mental health crises intersect with 911 calls and how Michigan is finding more humane responses. The work continues, powered by purpose, protected by passion. The Michigan Chronicle partnered with Local 4 News Detroit to produce 24 hours of coverage from Highland Park.
Could we tell the story through everyone else and kind of embed ourselves and really be in their lives, in their homes, in their kitchens? We're going to figure out what are their concerns and what can we do to help them. We don't necessarily know because we want to spend that time there with them.
Covering residents and nonprofits across the city, lifting the community and creating real impact.
What has it been like living in the dark?
Scared.
So this week, we've got some big news to share. Some solar street lights are coming back to this community.
So now you have a well-lit block and nobody can be in the shadows.
Our community thrives when it's informed, engaged, and heard. That's the power of local journalism, rooted in the places we call home. Because when we know more, we can do more together.
Now that we've seen the human side of the crisis, it's time to understand the facts on the ground, both in Michigan and across the country. What can data tell us about where we stand and where we're headed? To give us that foundation, we're joined by two leading scholars in journalism and media studies, Tim Franklin, Senior Associate Dean at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, and Tim Voss, Director of Michigan State University School of Journalism. Please welcome Tim and Tim.
You have a Tim sandwich. Thank you, Catherine, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here this afternoon for this very important discussion. So thank you for that. I'm going to be a little bit like Dr. Doom in presenting a lot of data to you, but there also are some positive things to talk about that are happening as well. We are all of us in this room, are living through a historic transformation, a transformation of how news is consumed, of how news is produced, of how it's distributed, and how it's paid for. Now, all of these changes in some cases are creating more choice for consumers, and that's a good thing. But it's also led to the collapse of the business model that has supported local news for many years. And this is not just a crisis for the industry, it's also a crisis for our communities. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to lay a lot of numbers on you, and hopefully some of them will resonate. So the Medill School at Northwestern is home of the Medill Local News Initiative. We're also the home of the State of Local News Project. We have perhaps the nation's largest database of all local news outlets in the country. And why do we do that? We do that so that we can spot trends that are happening in the industry, so that we can inform folks like you who care about local news about what's happening. So this is from our 2024 report, which was issued at the end of last year. This is obviously a map of the U.S., and the yellow counties on this map are counties that are entire news deserts. No newspaper, no digital site, no public radio, no ethnic media in those counties. The light purple, it's Northwestern, so we love purple. The light purple counties are counties with only one news source remaining. And then the deep purple counties are ones that have multiple news sources that are still remaining. But these are the facts from that map. So there are now more than 200 entire counties in the U.S. with no local news. There are now more than 1,550 counties in the U.S. with only one remaining news source. And taken together, that's 50 million plus Americans with no or very limited access to local news, which is, I think, a pretty alarming number. Now, this is data from the end of 2024. I want to mention what's happened last week in Washington. I'm not going to get into politics, but just want to lay some more data on you. Last week, Congress approved the defunding of public broadcasting across the U.S., and this is going to make those numbers and that map look even worse over the next few months, and inevitably it will lead to that. So there are about 386 standalone public broadcasters in the U.S. About 225 of those have newsrooms with local journalists covering local events and local schools and local businesses and so forth. And when you count repeater stations, these are stations that re-air signals from flagship stations, there are about 1,100 public radio stations in the U.S. And there are now estimates that we stand to lose between 10 to 20% of all public radio stations in the United States. Many of them derive 50, 60, 70, even more percent of their revenue from the federal government. So NPR is not going to go away. PBS is not going to go away. Detroit public radio and media is not going to go away. Might they have to make cuts? Yes. But it's small, rural, and medium-sized markets across the country that are going to be really severely affected by this cut, and it's going to mean less local journalism across the U.S. as a result. Now, in addition to the loss of public broadcasting, Medill and our really terrific data scientists at the school created a predictive model. They looked at all the characteristics of current news desert counties and then looked at counties with only one remaining news source to say which one of these counties are at high risk of losing local news in the next 5 years. So based on their analysis and our predictive model, we have 249 additional counties on top of the 200 plus news deserts that we consider to be at high risk of losing local news. And if you look at the map, you'll see many of these purple counties are ones that are adjacent to current news deserts. which will expand the regions where there's a lack of local news. Just some quick data points. I'll run through these quickly. The U.S. has lost about a third of its newspapers in the last 20 years. About 70% decrease in newspaper employment. You'll hear more about that. About a 60% decrease in newspaper reporters and editors. A total loss of 266,000 jobs. And the newspaper industry ranks fourth among all industries and all categories in loss of jobs during that time frame. And as is the case with many parts of our society, there are the news haves and the news have-nots. People who live in news deserts tend to be older, they tend to have less educational attainment, and they tend to be poorer than those who live in news rainforests, as we call them. So the challenges to solving the local news crisis, well, as I said, the business model has basically collapsed for local news. 60% of the ad revenue has been lost just in the last decade. Imagine any industry in which 60% of your major revenue base goes away during that time, which is a very obviously serious problem. There are other issues as well. AI is having a big impact on readership of news sites. We could talk more about that later. There's also news fatigue, which is an increasing problem as well. And as I said, this isn't just a crisis for the industry. It's I think, a concern for every community. And what happens when local news goes away? There's now research on this, not necessarily research by us, but by other universities that shows that in low information or news desert counties that there's less civic engagement. That means lower turnout in local elections, fewer candidates running for office in local elections. It means increased polarization, less ticket splitting, more party line voting in those counties. It also means there's research that shows it results in higher government borrowing costs because there are fewer watchdogs in communities, so the bond rating agencies raise interest rates on those areas. There's even a study that shows that corruption rises in communities where there's loss of local news because there's no traffic cop, if you will, minding the store in those communities. And also, perhaps not surprisingly, research that shows the growth of misinformation and disinformation in areas where there's no reliable local news. And so the implications of this, I think, are tangible and real. So now to talk more about the situation in Michigan, my friend Tim Voss from Michigan State.
You'll see more of Tim in a moment, hence the Tim sandwich. But this is what it looks like in the state of Michigan. This is research, again, done by Northwestern. There is a news desert county in the UP. 40 counties have only one local news source. And we look just at the newspaper part of this here, but we see a big decline in newspapers from 2005 to 2024, and then looking at newspaper jobs from 2013 to 2023, we see a big loss of journalists who have the experience, the embeddedness within their communities to know what's going on. So at Michigan State University, we have something called the American Communities Project. Dante Cheney, who heads that, is here today, and you might want to talk to him about some of these findings when we have a discussion later. But the American Communities Project has a typology of different kinds of communities. And there are 8 of these kinds of communities in Michigan. And when we look at how this problem plays out across these different community types, it's a varied picture. So one of those community types is called rural middle America. These are counties that have less diverse population. They're 91% white than other American Community Project types. They're also spread into less urban locales. 59% of the population lives in places the Census Bureau labels as rural. And though they tend to be made up of small towns, these places generally aren't reliant on agriculture. Now, every kind of community faces its own kind of challenges. but rural middle America has survived and in many cases thrived because of strong civic engagement. If these communities are deprived of civic engagement that news outlets have fostered, it could spell mounting problems. Less civic engagement exacerbates lower voter turnout, increases polarization, and so on. The next is the middle suburbs. So the middle suburbs have been slower to urbanize than the semi-urban places around them. 83% white, 6% black, 5% Hispanic, 1% Asian. They're less diverse than the urban suburbs and exurbs. They are also less wealthy with a median household income of less than $65,000. These communities face less specific and more general threats than the other community types in Michigan, but this means decreases in civic engagement and voter turnout, greater polarization, and misinformation looms as a possibility as news outlets contract. The next community type from the American Communities Project is Grain America. And again, if you're paying attention here, you can see the counties in Michigan that are considered Grain America. These are households slightly below middle income, around $57,000 annual median household. But of course, a big defining factor is age. More than a quarter of everyone in these counties is 65 years of age or older. Only 18% of the population is under 18, making it one of the oldest types in the American Communities Project. They tend more politically conservative. The demographic represented in Grain America overlaps significantly with populations that are subject to misinformation. With fewer news outlets sorting information from misinformation, the problem is likely to get worse rather than better. The misinformation often fuels polarization, so the problems compound. The next is big cities. Well, there's one big city in Michigan, according to the American Communities Project, but that's Detroit and the surrounding county. Diversity is the key word here. The population, 46% white, 17% Hispanic, 16% African American, 6% Asian. The median household income is a little above $68,000. Often, though, with large pockets of poverty as well as pockets of wealth. The big cities are the most populous type. They lean Democratic. Now, the anonymity that comes with big cities has historically made them places where corruption is harder to detect. With fewer journalists and fewer outlets investigating powerful players, unchecked corruption is a particular concern in this community type. Another community type is urban burbs, and I'm probably spending too much time describing what each of these are, but these are less, or they're densely populated and diverse. 60% non-Hispanic white, 16% Hispanic, 11% African American, 6% Asian, 1% indigenous, with high incomes and many college degrees. They lean Democratic. While diversity is a strength in many places, it's also the case that such environments, when not mediated by institutions such as journalism, face a higher risk of polarization. Again, the decline in journalists and news outlets in urban areas and in urban suburbs are a source of concern when it comes to polarization. Another community type is college towns. There are a bunch of these areas in Michigan. College towns sort of speak for themselves. Young people have historically had a mediocre record of participating in local elections and local politics. Again, one of the things we know about declines in news coverage is that it is accompanied by low voter turnout. College towns would thus face a particular risk with a decline in news outlets. And then just a couple of smaller kinds of counties here, the exurbs. Basically, Michigan exurbs are not plentiful, nor have they seen a sharp decline in journalism. So let's take that as good news. However, as the amount of news produced declines, we should be concerned about lower civic engagement, lower voter turnout, increased polarization, and other problems. And then there's working class country, again, not a huge part, nor do we see that they've declined significantly. So let's take that as good news too. However, the amount of news produced as it declines, we should be concerned about, again, these wide-ranging problems that Tim highlighted a moment ago. Now, Tim will be talking about the bright spots here in just a moment, but just be mindful that these new forms of media outlets are not randomly distributed across all 8 of these community types. Instead, they are serving, at present anyhow, only some kinds of communities, and that should be a concern for us going forward. So back to Tim.
Thank you, Tim. And just to amplify the point that he just made, 90% of all digital-only local news sites are in metro areas. And the crisis of news deserts is predominantly in rural areas, not entirely, but largely. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So I'm not entirely a Dr. Doom. There are some bright spots, and there are a lot of journalists that are working very hard to reinvent. As I mentioned, we're transforming as an industry, and so that means new types of media. So the other thing we do at Medill is we track growth in local news, not just decline in local news. So the bright lights that you see on this map are all 258 local news startups in the U.S. in the last 5 years. Many of them are nonprofit, but more than 40% of them are for-profit, so it's a combination of both. And also there are some print local news startups as well, I should say. And then every year, over the last couple of 3 years, we profile a dozen local news outlets that we think are innovating and that are providing a model potentially for the rest of the nation in terms of their creativity and how they're reaching audiences. And I didn't want this moment to pass without saying that there are a couple right here in Michigan that we've profiled as national bright spots in local news. One is Bridge, Michigan. Do we have anybody from Bridge, Michigan here? We do? Okay, congratulations to you for all the good work that you're doing. And Outlier Media here in Detroit is another one of our local news bright spots. So anyway, the issue is that every year there are more newspapers that die than there are local outlets that get created. So we end up with this net loss in the local news industry, and hopefully that's something we can get turned around. So with that, I will turn it back over and we'll move on. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Tims. I enjoyed working with a Tim myself when it came to the news industry back in the day. Look, one of the reasons I'm here is I believe national news is not going to earn its trust back until local news, the foundation of the information ecosystem, is rebuilt. As I semi-joke, a man named Craig thought classifieds ought to be free, yada, yada, yada. We're now in a crisis. So to have that discussion about how to navigate this, we're going to bring back Catherine, who's CEO of the Grand Media Group, Badalamente. I hope I got that right. Excellent. Hiram Jackson, who's been name-checked already, who's CEO of Real Times Media. Nicole Avery-Nichols, the executive editor of the FREEP, Detroit Free Press. And Wendy Turner, the executive director of Michigan Public Media. Welcome all. Let's get started. Well, I don't have a mic. I don't mean to lord over you guys on this, but I'm going to start. Nicole, I want you to take the first question. You've got the largest media footprint, arguably, at least in the print space here. Look, we use the word crisis. You've been at the Free Press a long time. When did the crisis begin?
I'm a Generation X journalist, so I don't feel as if we've been in crisis for my full 30 years. But what I've experienced since coming into the business in the spring of 1993, I believe, is a shrinking, right? Is a devaluing of news as it relates to community and as it relates to democracy and civic engagement. So every single year in the business, probably in the 2000s, I've seen staffing, shrink. The Tims just went through what it really looks like in Michigan. So for some of us who came of age professionally in this business over the last couple of decades, all we've known is shrinking. However, it's exciting in that this time embraces technology. We've seen emerging technologies happen. I'm one of the journalists who came of age. I remember when I got my first email address. Podcasts is a thing. Newspapers do documentaries, et cetera. So there are some exciting things happening, but we cannot deny that journalism has really kind of got into a very small space. And I'm loving that we're having this conversation today.
Why did you mind if I borrow the mic and we'll just trade it back and forth? Because I don't want to just keep sitting. Can you address one more thing before I move on? You had said the pandemic changed the mindset for you at the Free Press, particularly when it came to, look, 10 years ago, everybody would have called everybody up here competitors.
Yes.
We're not even frenemies anymore, right? We are allies in a bunker taking incoming. But talk about how the pandemic changed your mindset.
I think for me, just personally, and I'm glad you raised that. For me personally, I think the pandemic and facing a global health crisis in a industry that's shrinking sort of clarified our need and commitment to community. Maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the COVID pandemic, we saw news organizations shutter. We saw, people having to take layoffs and things like that. And at the Free Press, it really became facing furloughs, 6 weeks of those, right? It really became about how do we deliver this really important information to our communities at a time of need. And we, all of us, Michigan Radio, Bridge Detroit, Outlier Media, et cetera, we had to really have that conversation with each other and rely on each other and work together in Michigan as a team. It wasn't about, who's going to be the last news organization standing. It was really about how do we help our communities and be of service.
Catherine, if you can jump in here, because you were talking about how the importance that, look, you have also a huge footprint with DIV. And the importance of essentially surfacing up some of these new local media outlets.
One of the things that we're really focused on is partnership and making sure that we are partnering with others that are in the media space. We know that we still have a really big megaphone in town and that we can promote some of the really good work that's happening across the street at other outlets. And unfortunately, I think that we're still probably suffering a little bit on the broadcast side of feeling like some of these others are competitors and that we don't want to, take away our position. But the truth is that we, just like everyone else, are in a place where we need to figure out new ways of being able to create value for the consumer. And we are just like everybody else trying to figure out a path forward. And I don't know how many people realize that broadcast journalism is in a crisis just as well as newspaper. We're really looking at a time when even a market like Detroit or Houston, where we have 2 of our biggest stations, there's not enough revenue to support the amount of TV stations in town. There just isn't. It's declining.
How likely will one of the Graham affiliates end up in a duopoly?
Well, if you follow the news at all, you'll know that with the change of administration, that there is a new FCC chairman, and there are a couple of regulations that are in place that have been in place for 50 years. At a time when we really looked at competition, being the people that sit on the stage with me, we all know that competition is coming from a million different places today. And so those regulations are likely to be lifted, which is a good and bad thing. Frankly, it's going to allow broadcast organizations like Graham Media Group to be able to have a longer lifeline. I mean, that's really how we speak today, which is being able to potentially acquire another TV station in one of our markets so that we can combine forces with another broadcast outlet to be able to have more reporters on the streets. But that really wasn't even a consideration about, before the election for us, because the FCC chairman under the previous administration was not about ready to lift those regulations. But that's going to create a major, shift in the broadcast industry. There's going to be lots of consolidation. You're going to have, fewer broadcast outlets across the country.
If you're wondering what a duopoly looks like, one time, one of the first ones I came across was in Honolulu. Was covering the president, and the CBS affiliate and the NBC affiliate were both owned by the same station, and literally they had a set on a Lazy Susan where you'd see the CBS logo and then it would turn around, there was the NBC logo, but it was the same news. My hometown of Miami, I believe now, is the largest market in the country with a duopoly, with the ABC and Fox is now owned by the same. Hiram, let's talk a little bit you're on the business side, and you've been talking about how your journalists are getting more comfortable at least understanding your challenges, and sort of the line that, I've always thought it's important for journalists to understand how the bills are paid. Nicole brought up that us as Gen Xers, I think we're the first generation that sort of embraced that.
Yes.
Our mentors used to believe in that big Chinese firewall. We shouldn't know anything about that, but the reality is the reality. How do you navigate it?
Yeah, I think that it's, that wall used to be a lot more solid when I got into the business about 20 years ago. Today, I don't think anybody argues about, how you're going to make payroll this Friday, or, how you're going to pay your bills. But it's traditionally been a big challenge because I wasn't raised in this industry. I was kind of a marketer. And so my foundation is just creative revenue generation. And some of the rules that existed in this business, I just wasn't aware of. So folks in our business they were always telling me to stop doing this and don't do that. And but the one thing that I knew is that the Michigan Chronicle always was an organization that had a lot of integrity, a lot of credibility, and 90 years of servicing the community. And so, we were always very careful not to do things to compromise that. But at the same time, we were challenged with, severe revenue declines in our core business. So I would say 20 years ago, we started an events division. That wasn't popular inside of our organization, doing a number of events. Today, we do about 75 events around the country. Here on this stage, we do Pancakes and Politics. We're formerly on this stage. And that has become a signature item for us. It's hard to imagine the Michigan Chronicle without Pancakes
An important
and
revenue
Politics.
that's going to...
Absolutely. Yeah. We have developed these ancillary businesses that fund our newsroom and give us the ability to continue to do the great stories about the communities that we serve. Without these, what I call non-traditional revenue streams, we'd be out of business. We found ways to monetize our archives. What our customers know is that we have a deep relationship with the Black community, a unique relationship, a trusting relationship. And so when you think about how to monetize that, you got to be careful. You got to, understand that for 90 years, publishers of this organization have operated with full integrity. So that's the balance for us, developing ways to create revenue streams without what I call prostituting the brand, but things that will, authentically fund the newsroom and do the work that we feel is necessary.
And that is, sometimes it's sponsored content, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's events.
Sometimes it's consulting, marketing services.
Member circles type of thing.
Absolutely.
Different levels. Okay. Wendy, I want you to tackle two things. One is an interesting innovation that I could, either way, that's great, about sort of transforming the personalities, if you will, of public radio. But before that, given what happened last week,
Right.
I think everybody in the audience wants to know, what's the impact on you? What's the impact on Michigan Public Radio?
Well, we're going to lose about 6% of our budget. We have prided ourselves in expanding our journalism. In part, I think in public media, we have wanted to be part of the solution because our stations reach these rural areas to sort of begin to fill the gap. And as Tim said, we're now contributing to the gap potentially. But at Michigan Public, we're going to have to, create deeper partnerships with our colleagues. We're going to have to build expanded relationships with organizations like Bridge and Outlier and some of my colleagues here. And we want to reach more people and be more of service to a greater range of where those news deserts are.
Is it also mean that you have to rethink nonprofit status, or is it more of it's just find new ways to raise money?
Well, one of the things I think in public media, and certainly at Michigan Public, is we do have diversity of funding sources. We have very strong membership programs. We have sponsorship programs. We apply for grants. And so I think that I think that's still a good model. Okay. I think we have had a shock to the system for a model that included federal funding that we have been depending on for more than 50 years. And so instead of just sort of the erosion, which we are also experiencing in the erosion of broadcast listening to radio, but now we have this sudden shock to the system of this loss of funds. So we're all very focused right now on filling the immediate gap. We are, many of us who have a June fiscal year and a July 1 start, are 2 weeks into a fiscal year in which we're going to have 500,000 more gone, instantly gone. But then after that, after we think about those very urgent needs, we begin to have to start talking to each other about what's next. And I'm actually feeling really good about, I'm new to Michigan, but I am feeling very good about the Michigan radio, public radio and TV stations. We have been talking consistently and looking for ways that we can work more strongly together and try to find efficiencies on the back end so that we continue equal amount of mission work.
Now let's talk about something you had mentioned when we were talking earlier, which is how you've got Michigan Public Radio embracing basically personality-driven newscasts, essentially the influencer model, and bringing that to public radio. Is that how you would describe it, or
I
not
mean,
quite?
I would say that is something we are thinking about leaning further into. Our on-air personalities are companions to our listeners. I mean, we were at Art Fair here in Ann Arbor this weekend, and all of our on-air personalities were just mobbed by people who maybe didn't recognize their face, but certainly recognized their voice. And so as brands become less and less trusted, we know that people trust people. And if we already have people who are trusted to be in the cars and homes of our community, maybe there's ways that we can lean further into that and participate in more community events and ethical influencer.
Ethical influence. Catherine, one of the things that I think is a hallmark of most, I always say, why do people trust local? When you ask a survey, why do people trust local news more than any other type of media? And I always say it's because they can fact check it every day. They go outside, they told me it was going to rain and it rained. Mm-hmm. Or they told me it wasn't going to rain and it didn't rain. If there was anybody that would be an influencer that everybody knows their name, it's the weather person. Yes. And I've noticed in more and more local affiliates that in many ways, weather is arguably probably the tip of the spear when it comes to keeping audience from leaving and maybe even acquiring audience, right?
Well, and I don't know if anyone's noticed, but weather's gotten a little bit more severe in the last couple of years. So we talk about the fact that, it's more important now than ever before.
Thank goodness for climate change. It will help the local news crisis, right? I'm kidding.
Yeah, We have a station in San Antonio, Texas, and everyone knows what happened over the July 4th holiday, right? If you want to be reminded about why it's so important for us to be in those communities, you just have to be in one of those newsrooms and see what it meant to our people. Those, you ask why it's trusted, it's because the people that work for us live in those communities. They send their kids to the schools, they report on what's happening, they care about every person that is in that community. Our local meteorologist who was on duty when the first floods were coming in was making calls to Mystic Camp, and no one answered the phone. And we literally are trying to figure out how to take care of them emotionally, everything that they're feeling, because of how graphic the images were covering that story. And that's the reason why we matter so much, is because we care so deeply about those communities, because they're our neighbors, they're the people that we care about. And the truth is that every single day, those people in those newsrooms get up and are committed to wanting to tell a truthful, correct story and do the right thing. And that needs to be protected. But whether, if you're a part of any meeting that I start when we're talking about what matters when we're talking about our coverage, I'm always like, let's just start with weather, and more weather, because of how it's becoming such an important story every single day.
That's the national nightly news rundown these days, by the way. Nicole, I'm curious. One of my, I think I can say this with somebody representing the Graham family on here. One of my big beefs with the Washington Post is that they don't do local news anymore, except for on one thing they do extraordinarily well: weather. They have something called the Capital Weather Game, and they do micro forecasting, and it is absolutely outstanding. It is one of the great contributors that they've made to local news. Nothing else. God help you if you want to know what's going on in City Hall or Arlington County government, but they do that. How much are you doing that now at the Free Press, and how important has weather become? And then after that, I want to hit on sports.
Weather is tremendously important. I would say there was a time when maybe weather might get the side eye from a traditional, very serious
Particularly newspapers. You might put the map on the back of the paper, and that's about it, right?
Absolutely. But we know that people turn to us out of habit. What's going to happen outside when I walk outside today? So, weather lifts all boats, but it also connects people with us in terms of their routine. And we know if we can get them on weather, maybe they'll be interested in our investigations, our entertainment, our art coverage, our columns, etc. So there is not one thing in this period of time in 2025 that we snub our nose at as journalists. We are to be of service to communities. Right? If they're looking for the information, It's our job, as a general news organization, the paper of record, to deliver that information to them when they're looking for it.
In fact, I'd love all of you to address this. I'm glad you used the word service. There's a gentleman named Richard Gingras, who some of you might know from the Google News Initiative. He's since left that. He's working with some other things. But he has this theory that he said the worst thing to happen in journalism was all the president's men, because it created the mindset that all journalists and everybody that went into journalism, particularly in our generation, was there to get the big story, was there to get the story that was going to make the movie. When you just said the single most important thing that 90% of journalism is, service to people. Yes. How do we help you live your life? And I guess I'm one of the things, my biggest concern about all the local news startups, and I'd love for all of you to address this, is that I sometimes worry that we're so proud of our journalism for journalists, I call it, that we don't think about how do we inform everybody else. Everybody in this room is always going to find a way to be informed, right? And they'll probably pay. Our misinformation crisis are the people that used to be accidentally informed by your front page when they picked up the paper and the step, or accidentally informed by Catherine's TV station when they were waiting for the local sports, but they found out, oh, the city councilman's corrupt. How do we inform those that are not subscribing?
How do we inform those that are not?
That are not intentionally tuning in. But we've got to, can we bring them in another way?
We do think a lot about how to bring people in. I've been calling it sideways, and that is talking about Michigan to Michiganders, and we can't get enough of hearing about the hand and, unique things about Michigan. And so one of the ways—
You're clearly new. You're still into the hand, right? That's such a first-year Michigan.
I'm not just to tease it, we're about to launch a podcast sometime this fall called On Hand. So I hope that it's still,
Wisconsin may have a rivalry.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So we call it kind of coming in sideways, where we start to present more topic-based, lifestyle-based content through our digital channels in hoping, because we don't think announcing to people who don't know what Michigan Public is and say the brand that they will have any idea, right? For us to have the hubris to assume that people even know what public radio is short-sighted. So we're thinking about these sideways entry points through topics people care about. Last year, we, as a nation of public media, did a study called the RUN study, the Researching Unmet Needs, and we were so excited about all the deep journalism that people would, express interest about. The number one thing that respondents felt was important and needed was community calendars about things happening in their towns. So this is, a wake-up call, and I feel like our organization is beginning to really see, and we are putting forward first the idea of what does the community need, and asking and listening, and then just being responsive without our sort of editorial award-winning filter.
Go ahead. No, Nicole, how would you? Where are you trying to, how would you say you're trying to, I guess, inform the uninformed? The folks that aren't paying, but the ones we used to accidentally inform that are choosing not to be informed.
Right. So a couple of things. We have the benefit of 194 years. We have, 14 news organizations in the state, so we have a reach. We have marquee topics at the Free Press that we cover: autos, sports, investigations. Storytelling is at the key. I would say what we try to do is lean into those marquee subjects and diversify how we're telling stories. I like to call us storytellers because we're not just writers, we're not just reporters, but we tell stories in print, online, in podcasts, like you mentioned. I love that you brought up the events. We have Breakfast Club conversations. We tell stories in spoken word. So that's almost our side door. We have a Free Press Film Festival. Kathy Kay is out here. She was the founder of the Free Press Film Festival, where we highlight documentary films that focus on Michigan. Hopefully we'll bring that back this year. Those are the ways in which we're trying to capture not only the eyeballs, but the hearts and minds of our community, where they see us as a positive, add value, and as a good corporate citizen.
Hiram, how would you answer the question?
A couple of ways. Number one, we don't have paywalls on our website. I just feel that there are people in the community that are, that dollar could help them catch the bus to work. So at some point we may have paywalls, but I think that what we've tried to do is partner with other organizations to broaden our reach. We have a great partnership with the Graham Media, specifically with WDIV. You saw the 24 Hours in Highland Park promo. We feel we have a very unique platform, but we do have a smaller audience. And partnering with WDIV allowed us to reach outside of our core audience and tell stories and to build our audience, to reintroduce ourselves to an audience, to a younger audience that may not be as familiar with the Michigan Chronicle. I saw Catherine on a panel in New York, and she was talking about the future of media is collaboration, and she challenged all of us to find local media partners. And so I went up to her that same day, and a couple of months later, we were working together. And that particular story in Highland Park, we were able to help them gather momentum to put some street lights in the city that I grew up in, that I care about. They were already focused on Highland Park, but we were able to bring some additional credibility to that story. They were able to amplify our content. So it was just a wonderful way of kind of reaching outside of our natural core, our natural boundaries, and bring in some folks who wouldn't normally be enjoying our content. So we're looking for additional strategic partners to help us amplify our message, and I think that that is a strong way to grow our brand.
Catherine, earlier you talked about the, and I'm curious there was a time local TV was cutting back on the coverage of sports because the assumption was, everybody's watching ESPN, everybody's doing this. But now there's high school sports and there's youth sports. And I've noticed a lot more major market affiliates are saying, you know what, we should cover these local high school games more. And, there's some examples. The folks at Mass Live, which is a Massachusetts one, have found that the coverage of local high school sports, and it doesn't matter the sports, not just football and basketball, literally can translate to new subscribers because they want to see more of that thing. How are you doing that with your various affiliates?
So again, if anyone has worked with me over the last couple of years, you know how obsessed I am with local sports, or especially youth sports. And it's partially because I'm a mother of a child that plays soccer, and I see how crazy the parents are, including me.
And they'll spend stupid money.
Exactly.
I'm done. I just finished. So trust me, I know what you mean.
I was like, what are they more passionate about? And you're talking about it literally, the entire community, right? We're talking about us being able to have a relationship with the community in a way that is at the heart of their passion, their children, what's happening. And it's an underserved area right now. And it's a place where we can actually compete, and we're not going to have competition coming from a national level. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what does that look like, including the fact that I even commissioned a study to try to figure out where we could build a facility in southeastern Michigan. Because I thought, why not actually build a facility, have us be the heart of it, live stream from there, and make Local 4 at the center of everything that people are caring about when they're coming to that community space. So it is absolutely, I think we haven't done it, obviously, but it's hard to find property. But we are absolutely, looking at that as a way of being able to reconnect. So hard today to be able to connect with the consumer, and we think that that's one of the ways that you're talking about a side door, a way for us to be able to have that community connection. My dad sat in his armchair every night and watched, thankfully, Local 4. He watched Carmen Harlan and Mort Krim. And I can remember him at 11 o'clock being in that chair and us sitting at his feet, watching the station with him. Clearly that doesn't happen anymore. It's harder, people aren't staying up to actually get the headlines. So we need to figure out new ways of being able to have that connection.
Well, I only have a couple more minutes. So I want all of you to answer this out question. This calendar year, what's your most urgent problem to solve? There's a lot of problems we're all trying to solve in this room. But what's an urgent problem you're trying to solve this year?
Fill the gap for federal funding first, and then secondly, take more action in collaboration with my wonderful colleagues from around Michigan.
While we have a really robust news environment here in Michigan, still suffering from the devaluation of news. So our biggest challenge, what we're trying to do, is give our news consumers tremendous value. I'm thinking about, remember when McDonald's came with the supersize, right? That big cup where you were like, ooh, I'm quenched, your thirst. That's what we really are trying to push and do for local news, to make sure that people see value, and they are customers.
They're not readers, they're customers.
They are customers, yes, sir.
Wow, a couple of challenges, but our biggest challenge is audience growth. I mean, obviously, folks are not going into the grocery stores and the party stores and having papers delivered like they used to. So we're just trying to diversify how people see our content, produce more video to build our audience.
We're really focused on we've been kind of referring to it as less inside cats, more outside cats, which means we need more people on the street telling the stories, reporting. We need more reporters, frankly. And so trying to redefine what the newsroom looks like so that we can actually have more people out there creating bespoke, original reporting.
That's a great answer. As I've said, that media has the same problem as politicians. They've gotten too far away from the actual people. And the closer we get, the easier it'll be to build trust. First of all, we need a crowd fund for Michigan Public Radio here, right? No. But thank you to everybody.
it's me again. As we've seen, the media landscape is shifting, but there are bright spots thanks in large part to the growing role of philanthropy. We're now joined by 3 leaders from the Knight Foundation and Press Forward, which have been at the forefront of efforts to reimagine and reinvest in local journalism. Please welcome Duck Liu, Director of Journalism, Knight Foundation, Latrice McClendon, Program Director for Detroit, Knight Foundation, and Melissa Davis, Network Director for Press Forward.
All right. Thank you all so much for participating in this, and thank you for the wonderful greetings, and thank you to the local media association for arranging this and getting us all into this room together. My name is Duck Liu, and I'm really excited to be here from the Knight Foundation. At Knight, we've been long-term supporters and funders for the local journalism ecosystem. And as such, I'd love to start out by just talking about what we look at in terms of the long-term outlook for journalism itself. And so I'd like to start with just 2 fundamental basic facts about these trend lines when it comes to this space. And the first one is that I think it's been clear that there's been at least a 25-year plus decline when it comes to journalism, from the dot-com bust to the great financial crisis, to the rise of the social media companies disintermediating our relationships with our audiences, to the pandemic, to the defunding of public media just this last week. Each one of those moments has marked a lower low when it comes to this space and our ability to serve our mission of informing and engaging our communities. So that's one macro trend that we see. And yet, I would encourage each of you to go and ask someone dear in your life and just ask them if they feel like they are underinformed. I would ask anyone to do you feel like you do not have enough information in this world? And I would answer that I doubt anyone would say that. I doubt most people would tell you that they feel overwhelmed with information. They feel overwhelmed. They're inundated with all of this stuff. And if they wanted to fill 24 hours of their day with just going around and just collecting information, they could do that so easily right now. And so the intersection of those 2 facts, right, that there's been a decline in the ability of organizations to produce and distribute verified information, and at the same time, the average person could not articulate that they feel as if that is missing. That is a market failure that I believe it is a foundation's duty and an imperative to act on and to solve for. And why is that? Because the effects of that market failure are pernicious. It is been compared to like eating popcorn, right? You can just fill your day. There's entertainment. You get news from here and news from here. But I liken it more to being like asbestos. It's filling our lungs, and it's making it harder and harder for each of us to feel like we're truly connected and grounded in a place and feel like we're in it together. And so as an individual, right, you can track this market failure. You can track this with data that we've gotten from Northwestern and Medill. You can see it in the rates of engagement when it comes to participation in civic events, when it comes to feeling isolated or disconnected from your communities. You can experience it on an everyday basis, just as a person living in a community, when you wonder what's going to fill that empty storefront on your street. Or to more substantive concerns like who's going to celebrate your child's accomplishment when they win the local sports game, so you can send that newspaper clipping to your parents and have them featured and be celebrated and feel like they're a valued member of the community. Or when you feel that this highway construction project and the cost overruns are happening, and you wonder who's going to be held accountable for that. Right? Those are all things that we can feel despite the fact that we may not be able to articulate what that root problem is. And to that end, what does it mean for a foundation? What does it mean for philanthropy? And why should we be a part of this conversation? It's because it also is so detrimental to our communities. And to any program officer or program director or community CEO, I just ask you, how much easier would your job be if the people you were trying to affect changes for and to make your community a better place, if they knew and had a verified set of facts that we were operating against, how much easier would be able to work on the problem of public health or fixing your school's community education and to solve for all of these issues if we were operating and we felt like we knew who our neighbors were, and that we felt that we were all in this together, and that we felt like we were all shared participants in this project of forming a more perfect democracy. And where does that lead us all back to? Fixing the problem in local news. And it leads us back to this moment as well with what's happening in Detroit. And I'd love to have my colleague Latrice here talk more about some of these bright spots that we're seeing in Detroit and what has, as a community funder and a community leader and someone who's really trying to make Detroit a better place for the people in it. How does local news and information fit into it, and how do you use and think about local news in order to inform your strategies?
Sure. First of all, let me say Doug for president. Doug, that was great. I don't get a lot of opportunity to see Doug because he's in Miami. I sit as the principal person here in Detroit leading the work for the Knight Foundation, so it's great to be here. And Doug, that was fantastic and very passionate. Honestly, journalism, is not my expertise, but I am a funder, right? And I'm also a resident of the city, as well as an elected official on the school board. And so when we talk about bright spots, first of all, let me say Detroit is a bright spot, okay? And I know that we've already given shout outs to a few of our local media organizations, but when you look at Bridge Detroit, I think Bridge is somewhere back there. I see Mr. Stephen Henderson. Just the work that he's doing to engage community to inform what he's talking about, right? I think that when I sit in meetings and I'm making decisions on what to fund, we can fund the Joe Louis Greenway all day. We can fund, all kinds of policy opportunities. But if the local news isn't reporting and informing on what we're funding, how do people know what we're doing? How do people get their information? How do people vote correctly? And so organizations like, I think I saw Outlier somewhere in here as well, really proud of the work they're doing here. They are a huge bright spot. I know several folks who have used their text program, which they have done something, they've modeled, how do you take journalism and actually, pull out have an actionable item, right? And so they've modeled with community, hey, we don't just want to inform you, we want to also give you information on what to do, what the next step is if you're dealing with a housing situation. And so I think that Detroit has had the ability to, we've been very creative, we've been very innovative, and let me be clear, I know we are in a moment of tension. Yes, we're doing all these amazing things, and we still have a lot more, a lot to think about so that we can continue to support local news. But as we fund, we are looking to support folks who are deeply rooted in community, right? I like to see those stories that are by Detroiters, not, it's good to hear, on a national level to hear some things, but it's also good to have Detroiters report on Detroiters. Because I think then there is an understanding of what really was happening in Detroit. I think about Michigan Chronicle and some of the work and the stories they report on. Recently, I read a story about a young lady, and I've actually met the young lady. She is she's a student, and she said Michigan Chronicle reported on her getting a scholarship. And it was such accurate information. It wasn't a doom and gloom story, but it was a proud story. She had significant challenges, right? I think she had got pregnant. She was a high schooler, but she was almost a 4.0 student. But the way they told the story was with hope, and it wasn't with like doom and gloom. Does that make sense? And so I think it's important that we have local media organizations that actually can connect to local folks and tell the stories from a local perspective. We also really believe, I think, at Knight Foundation in strengthening the ecosystem, not just individual outlets, like it's both and. So we've had a really big push to make sure that we're supporting the journalism ecosystem. We need more collaboration in this city, right? We've had it. I love to see sometimes the different local media organizations working together, but we can do better. And I think as we invest, we are looking to make sure that folks are collaborating, because we want sustainability in Detroit. We don't want some of the local media organizations that have stood up. I mean, the Tim showed an excellent report in 2019. We've had an amazing amount of growth. We want to see sustainability, and how we see that is through partnerships and collaboration. And so I think that as we do our work to fund Detroit, we need the help of our local media organizations to continue to support, and tell the truth, speak the truth. We need trusted resources. And I'm really excited to sit in this position to continue to fund and make sure that we're doing the right thing with our local media organizations. I'm going to punt this a little bit over to Melissa. Melissa, I know you have a national view, and you're doing a lot of work with Press Forward right now. Tell us a little bit about how Press Forward is shaping up in communities around the country. I know we have not yet launched one here in Detroit. It's kind of on the horizon, but tell us a little bit more what you have going on nationally with Press Forward.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me here. I apologize for my voice. I lost it on the plane getting here, I think. So, but Press Forward, if you haven't heard of this, it's a nationwide initiative, but it's really about rooms like this all over the country. And it's, this is an industry, as Doug mentioned and as Tim mentioned earlier, that has been in crisis for going on 20, 25 years now. It's been a slow-moving crisis, and sometimes journalists aren't always the best at covering their own story. And so it's up to members of the community who care about what's happening in this industry and to the communities as a result to kind of galvanize and speak up and find solutions that make sense for local communities themselves. And so while Press Forward is a nationwide movement that's been started by 22 philanthropic foundations, it's grown to a movement that's over 109 foundations and many of them local community foundations across the country, really sounding the alarm on behalf of the people that live there and the issues that they see that are really not getting covered in their local areas. So also it was really wonderful to hear people talking about business models and the role of philanthropy within this broader business model of local news. And there's no way that philanthropy is going to fill the money that's been lost in this industry that's been challenged for 20, 25 years. But what the great thing that philanthropy can do is create some energy, some innovation capital, some ability for journalists and local business people who run media companies to try new things that they maybe haven't had the ability to do for the past few decades. Because they've been in a state of decline. And so funding from philanthropy can be used to try new things, to try collaboration, to foster new ways of reaching audiences. And so what we see in the 36 chapters across the country are things like that. Local leaders, not just foundation leaders, but civic leaders, business leaders, journalists themselves coming together in groups to think about both raising local philanthropic dollars that are to be spent in their local communities, and then deciding how to spend those dollars through grant programs and capacity building for local journalists as an ecosystem. I love what you just said, Latrice, about the thinking of all of this as an ecosystem challenge. And I loved hearing some of the local CEOs talk about how they're partnering. Many of them have their own credibility with specific audiences, but they can kind of on the back end, collaborate to have reporting power, deep dive, investigative work can be a lot easier when news outlets work together. This has historically been a very competitive field, but it's been incredible and remarkable over the last 20 years, the increase in collaboration in this field. And I would say that's a big part due to some of the philanthropic dollars that have gone into it that are more concerned with community benefit and community outputs. And so that's been a real benefit, I think, from having philanthropy involved in supporting some of the innovation in local news.
Great.
I think that's about it for our time. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Keep it short and snappy. All right. Thank you all.
So, of course, we know that structural change requires more than goodwill. It often requires public policy, thoughtful, targeted interventions that can reshape the media environment. No one has been a more passionate advocate on that front than our next speaker. Please welcome Steve Waldman, founder and president of Rebuild Local News, to share success stories and possibilities that could matter deeply to Michigan. Thank you, Steve.
So this may be a two-part presentation. So we've heard that there's an incredible crisis with very severe consequences for not only obvious things like accountability and corruption, but also the fracturing of communities, division, the breakdown of people being more likely to demonize each other, misinformation, things like that. We have also seen that there are two great thrusts to try to fix this. There's a real revolution in the local news world to try to create new models, new business models that will be sustainable, that aren't as dependent as on advertising, and new editorial models that are serving the community, viewing the institutions not so much as being a publisher, but being a community institution and serving people. We have heard that there is a very significant, very important role for philanthropy to try to stimulate that innovation and plug some of these gaps. We believe that there's a third thrust that is very important, which is public policy. And this may sound weird because for one thing, like the idea of the news media, seeking help from the government in some way that it is supposed to be covering is scary if you don't do it the right way. There's certainly problems with that. I will point out that actually government policy has been helping the news industry since the founding of the country, when the first major social program that the founders instituted was a massive subsidy program for newspapers through cheap postal rates. And there have been other things since then. So we believe it can be done, but it needs to be done carefully. And that the size of this is so severe that it needs to be done. This may also seem weird given what happened last week with public broadcasting. We're talking about more help from public policy at a time when things seem to be going in exactly the opposite direction. Well, it turns out that while the federal government is going in one direction, there is a lot of activity on the state level that is actually quite encouraging. Rebuild Local News is a group dedicated, is a coalition dedicated for finding public policies and advancing them to help strengthen community news, often with an emphasis on the ultimate goal of having more local reporters. That is really what it comes down to. We have a number of different criteria for how to make this First Amendment friendly and how to make sure that political manipulation does not come in. The coalition includes many different groups, large and small. We sometimes joke that it's like a coalition of the unwilling, because most of the people don't really want to be dealing with public policy. They often spend the rest of the day fighting with each other. We have the publishers and the labor unions together, but in this case, they are joining forces to try to solve this. So I'm going to talk about activity. This is not about the public broadcasting fight. This is a kind of a new generation of types of policies that are being discussed on the state level. And we're seeing a lot of activity. These are all the states that on the left list are states that have actually taken action, have actually done stuff that are putting dollars and revenue in the bank accounts of local news organizations and making them more sustainable. If you add up actually the ones that are on that left column, it's more than $100 million in the next year. About $340 million over 5 years so far, just from about 6 or 7 states. So you can imagine the scale that this might get to if we are creative. So it really
it really is about creating community, and so much of why we're all fighting for to strengthen local news is about having real people in communities covering communities. As I said, almost about $100 million next year will come from various policies that have been enacted on the state level. And let me just quickly tell you what those are. Employment tax credits. This was passed in New York State and Illinois. New York passed a bill that has $30 million a year over 3 years. Illinois, $25 million over 5 years. Illinois, even though they passed it around the same month, Illinois is a full year ahead of New York in implementing it. And word just went out to the newsrooms, some of the newsrooms, that they were going to get about $150,000 in support. And it's going to be meaningful money to help hire reporters. We like this idea because the incentives are good. Hire more people, you get more money. Lay off more people, you get less money. It's right at the heart of the problem. And it's very non-bureaucratic and nonpartisan. Fellowships. This is sort of based on a program I used to be involved in called Report for America, and the idea is to put journalists into local newsrooms and then subsidize their salaries. This also is very First Amendment friendly because it's managed by universities. The reporters are put in to newsrooms, they do great work, and the government doesn't really have anything to do with what they're reporting on. This has now enacted in Washington State, New Mexico, and California. California has just passed $15 million to sustain the new version of it, which will field 40 reporters in California. Small business ad credit. This one hasn't been passed anyone on the state level yet, but there have been some interesting experiments on the county level. It is the idea that probably, I think, has the most political potential in purple and red states. It is subsidies for small businesses that advertise in local news. So the actual tax credit or the grant goes to restaurants and hardware stores that support local news. Again, it's got good insulation from the political pressures, but it's getting real money into newsrooms and helping small businesses market themselves. Government advertising, set-asides, and transparency. New York City pioneered this when the journalism school discovered that New York City has a great big marketing budget, and almost all of it was being spent on the New York Times and the New York Daily News. There's about 250 community newspapers in New York City who didn't like that when they heard that. And so they created a set-aside. 50% of the money has to actually go to community journalism. This had led to a shift of $72 million toward community news organizations over 5 years. And the interesting thing about this politically is this is not new money. This is money they were going to spend anyway. It's just saying, spend it locally. Spend it in a way that can actually help the communities. There are other models. I think I don't have time to go through all of them, but some are grants, ideas for creating a local news bank, various other approaches. It's actually a very innovative time, a very creative moment for different models. Now, where might this Michigan fit into that? You probably noticed it wasn't one of the states that had taken action yet. We, Rebuild Local News and Muckrack came out with a study 2 weeks ago that validates basically the stats that the Tims mentioned. We saw a 75% drop in the number of reporters since 2002. Now, the average, we also looked at this as reporters per population, because we think that's an important way to think about adequacy of reporters. So in 2002, there were about 40 reporters per 100,000. On average now in the country, 8.2 reporters per population. In Michigan, 7.4. In Detroit, 3.8. So we have real ground that we need to make up. What's the right approach for Michigan? I am aware that your politics is complicated and somewhat divisive these days. So you would be in a better position to know exactly which of these ideas or something else would work. As I said, the states like Michigan that are divided in purple, the idea of supporting small businesses that help local news seems to be the one that works politically, but my general message is simply that this needs to be part of the solution. There are ways of doing it that are First Amendment friendly and get the resources to the right place, and that we should be thinking about this creatively at the same time that we are also looking at innovation of the business models and philanthropy. Thank you.
Please welcome Mayor Mike Duggan, a proud native of Detroit and the city's second longest serving mayor. Since taking office in 2014, he has been at the forefront of Detroit's resurgence, revitalizing neighborhoods, restoring services, and championing inclusive growth. His leadership has been instrumental in shaping the vibrant city we know today. We're honored to have him with us. Welcome, Mayor Duggan.
Well, you even had me in suspense. I hated to interrupt that earlier presentation, but I just wanted to come by and say hello. And it's interesting, you are on a mission trying to find the future for local news. I'm on a different kind of mission, and you'd be surprised at how close the problem is that we're both trying to solve. So I'm running for governor as an independent, and as I go to these small towns, I have so much more insight into what's going on in the country. So I'm up in Lexington, which is about an hour north of Port Huron on Lake Huron. It's a town of 1,000 people. 100 show up on a Tuesday night to come and listen to me at a bar. The little Lexington grocery store the week before takes down their signs for specials and welcome to Lexington. Mike Duggan and I go and I sit with these folks. And of course, the first thing is, up here, we're forgotten. Our break wall is crumbling, our soil is eroding, our harbor is coming apart, it's our economic future. We're so small, nobody cares about us. How does a mayor of Detroit know anything about our situation? And I said, really? You think I don't know anything about representing people who felt like they'd been forgotten? I'd like to introduce you to a mom with 2 kids who lived on a block with 3 abandoned houses where her street lights didn't work. They couldn't use the park all summer because the grass wasn't cut, and see how they feel. But we spent our time coming together to fix the problems, not complaining about them. And as we sit and talk, they start to tell me about the issues that are facing the folks on the farms and the like. And this is a small town community. And after a while, they're relaxing, we're joking. The problem with deers hitting cars are issues up there. There are issues everywhere. It's interesting what's on their mind. Deer hitting cars is an amazing issue outstate Michigan, I can tell you. But I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, when I do these things, it's rare Donald Trump comes up in the conversation, or Washington or the like. These folks are focused on their own community and their own issues. And so I was about 45 minutes in and I say to them, let me ask you a question, why don't you answer honestly? How many of you would have shown up tonight if I were running for governor as a Democrat? And about a third of the hands in the room went up. And they started looking at each other and they started laughing. And they realized that even though they are a small town community, they are so divided by what's happening. They'd have never been in the same room together. And essentially the core of what I'm trying to do is say, isn't the basis of our state coming together as a community? And you guys can do all the analysis. You all know what has happened in this country. Somewhere along the line, the Democrats and the Republicans have managed to line up entirely on cultural grounds and have split. And it's been fascinating to me. I grew up, my father was a prominent Republican, appointed federal judge by Ronald Reagan. I wasn't afraid to go home for Thanksgiving. We thought it was fun to talk about these things. But he was a proud Republican who believed in a strong defense and balanced budgets and less government. You look at the Republican Party today, it doesn't stand for any of those things. And of course, the Democratic Party has morphed. And the way they have defined themselves is more about being against what the other side is. And the Democrats today in Michigan, you ask them what they stand for, they're all over the map. They know two things. They can't stand the Republicans and they hate Donald Trump. And they rally their base. If you look at the fundraising letters Democrats send out, it's never about build affordable housing in your community. It's never about let's do this for the schools. It's we have to stop the threat of the Republicans. Republicans do the same thing. We got to the point where if you're told somebody is going and ordering a latte, right, you assume that they're a Democrat. If they're going to a tractor pull, you assume they're a Republican. But actually, for a long time in this country, the cultural lines didn't follow the party lines. And what has happened to local news is much the same. This country is pulled apart, and people are getting their information. It's not just Fox and MSNBC. It's the person they're following on TikTok. It's the podcast that they're listening to. Somehow, we've gotten these cultural differences to command our attention. But I can tell you, just Sunday, I'm in Port Austin, which Port Austin, if you drive up Van Dyke for about 2.5 hours, you're running at a tip of the thumb. That's where Port Austin is, right? And somebody who's got a place on Lake Huron has got about 50 people. First lady walks in and gripes at me that I'm not on Blue Sky, which means I'm not progressive enough for her. The next guy that walks in owes a farm. It wants to know why he's listening to the mayor of Detroit, but somehow they get them all in the room together. But by the time we're done, they're telling me, we got a critical access hospital up here. That's our health care. They're far away from the major hospitals. They actually built it with local funds. They got to keep it going. And they're talking about how do we deal with the health care issue so we can have it here. They're talking about community. It is a local community issue. And if there is not local news that is covering the story of these communities, how much does that sense of community get lost? And so right now you are up against enormous forces. The same forces that are pulling each other apart politically are pulling each other for profits in the media system, right? You get more viewers and more clicks by being mad than by talking community. I do think this country will ultimately come back to valuing community, valuing what's going on. And when they do, it is going to be absolutely critical that local news is there. How else are they bonded together? And so I just think your mission is so critical. I think you just have to keep hanging in there and pushing back. And at some point, I really do think this country is going to get back to what's important. And what's important is what you are trying to cover every day. So I just wanted to come by and say, welcome to town. I'm really glad you're here, and I wish you the best of luck in what you're trying to do.
Thank you all again. Today has just been a powerful and urgent discussion. We've heard a lot about the threats, but we've also heard about the innovations, the inventions, and the hope that's still alive in local news.
So, I do have to just say before I go on to my closing statements that, you're all here today because we're looking for you to help partner with all of us. And if you're a business leader or own a business, partner with your local media organizations that are out there creating trusted journalism for your communities. If you're a policymaker, think about the things that Steve has put in front of us today. And of course, if you're one of the media organizations, let's all continue to partner together so that we're stronger together. As we close today's summit, one thing is clear: the crisis is urgent, but so is the opportunity to act. If you believe in the power of trusted journalism to strengthen our communities, we invite you to support the mission today, right now. On your seat, you'll find a donation postcard with ways to give, and near the stage, there's a poster with a QR code that takes you directly to our secure giving page. Every contribution, large or small, helps to ensure that local stories continue to be told. Thank you all for joining us today. It's really encouraging seeing this room filled. And for the Crisis and Local News Summit, all of you that have contributed to today's work. A special thank you to our partners at Detroit PBS for their incredible support and for taping today's important conversation, which makes it possible for us to distribute the event nationwide. Thank you so much for coming.